I used to run overnight loads from Denver to Cheyenne. Nothing unusual. Just a 2-hour stretch that I'd done 100 times. The only reason I remembered this one trip so clearly is because it was the first time I ever considered leaving trucking for good. It was late November, bitter cold, with snow piled along the shoulders. The wind out there on I-25 can push even a full trailer sideways. And that night, it was whistling hard across the plains. I had the heat blasting, a thermos of coffee next to me, and nothing on the radio but static. Around 2 a.m., I decided to pull into a rest area just outside of Wellington. The lot was practically empty, just me, a parked sedan with no lights on, and a pickup with a tarp over the bed. The lamps overhead gave off a weak yellow glow, and half the lot was swallowed in shadow. I pulled into a spot near the restroom building, killed the engine, and sat for a second, rubbing my eyes. That's when I noticed something off. The sedan across the lot had its driver's door open. No dome light, no one moving around, just open to the night air. I figured maybe someone ran to the bathroom, but it had been sitting like that the whole time I circled in. My gut tightened. I grabbed my jacket and hopped down, figuring I'd take a quick leak and get back on the road. The restroom building was cold inside, concrete echoing under the hum of fluorescent tubes. I stood at the urinal, and right then, the sound of the door creaking open echoed behind me. I turned fast. A man had walked in. He was tall, too thin for his frame, with a long winter coat that almost brushed the floor. His hair looked damp and straggly, like he hadn't dried off after a shower. But what froze me were his eyes. He didn't look at me like a normal person walking into a restroom. He locked onto me and didn't blink. "Cold night," I said, just to break the silence. He didn't answer. He just stood near the sinks, staring. I finished quick and moved to the sink farthest from him, scrubbing my hands harder than I needed to. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, and I noticed something dangling from his hand car keys. "You drive that truck?" he finally asked, voice low, almost a whisper. "Yeah," I said, not looking at him directly. He nodded once. "Don't sleep here." That was all. Then he turned and walked out, coat swaying, boots echoing on the tile. My heart was pounding. I waited a few seconds, then followed. When I stepped back into the freezing wind, the sedan's door was closed. Lights still off, and the man, nowhere. I didn't see him in the lot, didn't hear footsteps on the snow. The sedan looked empty, the pickup untouched. It was like he'd vanished into the dark. I climbed back into my rig and locked the doors, telling myself I was just tired, seeing things. But before I could start the engine, I caught movement in my mirror. A figure darted between the restroom building and the edge of the lot. I hit the ignition, headlights cutting across the empty asphalt. The sedan was gone. No engine noise, no taillights disappearing down the exit. Just gone. That's when I noticed something that nearly made me choke. On the passenger side window of my cab, a set of foggy fingerprints smeared across the glass, as if someone had leaned in, breathing, watching me while I was inside the restroom. I slammed the truck into gear and got the hell out of there, white-knuckling the wheel all the way to Cheyenne. I never saw the man again. I don't know if he was warning me, stalking me, or just screwing with my head. But to this day, I won't stop at that rest area, not even in daylight. And every time I step into a bathroom on the road, I check the mirrors twice before I get back in my cab, because I know someone could be waiting, just like he was waiting for me. I've been running long hauls for about 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen it all. Breakdowns in the middle of nowhere, drunks stumbling too close to the rig at rest areas, even a guy trying to siphon my fuel once. But what happened outside of Amarillo in 2019 is something I still think about almost every night. I am on the road. It was late spring, just after midnight, and I had taken a back route off I-42, shave some time. It was a 2-lane highway cutting through flat ranch land. No lights for miles, except my beams and the occasional glow from a distant farmhouse. The road was bone straight, the kind where your eyes start to blur if you stare too long. I was sipping on bad gas station coffee and fighting the heaviness in my eyelids when I saw it. At first it looked like debris in the road, something small and dark about 100 yards ahead. I slowed slightly, not wanting to blow a tire on a stray piece of metal. But as I got closer, the shape became clear. It was a bicycle, just lying on its side in the dead center of the lane. I pulled onto the shoulder, hazards flashing, and stepped out with my flashlight. The air was cool, and I could smell damp earth from irrigated fields. I swung the beam over the bike. It wasn't rusty or old. It was a modern mountain bike, the kind you'd see on a weekend trail ride. The chain was still moving like it had just been dropped. My skin prickled. Out there in the dark, nothing felt right. I shined the light in a slow circle, calling out a cautious hello. Nothing, just the distant chirp of crickets and the ticking of my engine cooling down. I dragged the bike off onto the gravel shoulder, figuring maybe a ranch kid had lost it somehow. I was climbing back into the cab when I heard footsteps. Quick, uneven, crunching over the gravel behind me. I froze with one boot on the step. The light from my hazards painted the road red. I turned my head slowly, expecting to see some kid running up. Instead, I caught a tall silhouette about 20 feet away, just barely outside the glow of my hazards. Thin, long arms, hanging too low, motionless. "Hey," I called, trying to keep my voice firm. "You okay? You dropped this bike?" The figure didn't answer. It just stood there. The wind shifted and pushed my flashlight beam across its face, or what should have been its face. All I saw was hair. Long, stringy, matted to pale skin. No expression, no response, just watching. A wave of panic went through me. I got into the cab and slammed the door, locking it instantly. My breathing was too loud in my ears. I grabbed the radio mic, but froze again when I saw movement in my side mirror. The figure was closer now, stepping slowly up the shoulder, straight toward the passenger door. I hit the air horn. The blast shook the quiet fields, echoing into the night. But he didn't flinch, didn't speed up, just kept walking with that strange, uneven gait. I threw the truck into gear, not caring about the logbook. The rig growled back onto the highway. Gravel pinged against the undercarriage as I rolled forward. I risked one last glance in the mirror. He was standing in the red flash of my hazards, holding the bike upright now, just staring as I pulled away. My heart was still hammering when I hit 60. The road stretched out empty in both directions. I kept telling myself it was just some drifter, some guy on something. But what rattled me most was what happened 30 miles later at a lonely truck turnout. I pulled over to catch my breath, hands still shaking, and stepped out to splash water on my face. The turnout was gravel, just a single sodium lamp buzzing above, and right there, under that lamp, was the same mountain bike, propped against the guardrail. I swear to you it was the exact same one, the same frame, the same dangling reflector on the back wheel. My gut dropped. My headlights stretched down the highway behind me. I hadn't been past I hadn't seen another set of lights the whole time. There was no way. I didn't stick around to study it. I was back in the cab with the doors locked in seconds. I floored it all the way back to the interstate, eyes glued to the mirrors, half expecting to see a figure standing on the shoulder at every passing mile marker. I didn't see him again that night. By the time I pulled into a crowded Love's at dawn, I was running on fumes and nerves. But when I walked around the rig for a quick inspection, my stomach twisted. On the passenger side door, just below the window, someone had traced a wet handprint in the dust. Long fingers splayed wide. I never told dispatch, never called the cops. I knew how it would sound. A biker in the middle of the road, a vanishing figure, a handprint. Nobody would believe me. Hell, sometimes I barely believe it myself. But every time I take a back road now, I think about that night. About the way he stared through his hair. About how the bike somehow got ahead of me, waiting under that lamp. And I always check my mirrors twice, especially when I see something lying in the middle of the lane. Because part of me knows if I had stopped again, if I had gotten out and walked closer, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. I drive a refrigerated rig out of Utah. This happened 2 winters ago on I-80 between Elko and Winnemucca. It was a Tuesday. Sleet hissed on the windshield and my hours were almost out, so I pulled into a small independent truck stop, one fuel island. A cinder block store with a buzzing open sign, and a gravel lot with a few tired pole lights. I fueled, bought a coffee, and parked nose out at the far edge so I could watch the entry lane in my mirrors. Wind pushed the sleet sideways. Inside, it was warm. I locked the doors, set the brakes, checked my logs, and texted my wife that I was shut down. The first thing was a single knock under the sleeper, a hollow tap like a wrench on metal. I sat up and listened. Nothing else. I told myself the truck was settling in the cold. I crawled into the sleeper without taking off my boots. The sleet ticked on the roof. The reefer droned. I was drifting when I heard footsteps in the gravel outside the passenger side. Slow, 3 or 4 crunches. A pause. Another crunch. My heart started pounding. I found my flashlight but didn't turn it on. I eased the curtain and watched the windshield. When a gust cleared the glass, I checked the mirrors. In the passenger convex, I caught someone between the trailers. Tall, thin, head down. I couldn't see a face. He stood half in the shadow of my trailer like he was listening to it. I hit the air horn once. He didn't jump. The sleet thickened and he blended into the dark. When it thinned, he was gone. I checked the locks again and opened the dashcam app to the front view. I lay there with the phone face up and tried to breathe normal. A shift went through the frame like someone stepped onto the catwalk. Then a scrape and a hiss. Long, quiet, unmistakable air near the glad hands. I fired the engine and washed the lot with light. For a split second, I saw him on the catwalk shoulders, hunched, hair stringy and wet, hands near the lines. He looked up into the glare. His mouth hung open. Then he dropped straight down between the frame and the front of the trailer, vanishing into that narrow space. I put the truck in gear and stopped. If he was under there, I didn't want to roll. My hands shook. I hit the air horn. Movement at the 5th wheel. A hand reached up, found the release, tugged, failed, and disappeared. A thump sounded under my feet. I dialed 911 and told the dispatcher where I was and that someone was tampering with my equipment. She told me to stay in the cab. Sleet ran down the glass. My heartbeat filled my ears. A face rose into the lower right of my windshield, inches from the glass. He must have climbed the step and grabbed the mirror brace. Long, greasy hair stuck to his cheeks. Pale skin. His lips moved, but I couldn't hear him over the engine. He lifted 2 fingers and tapped the glass where my eyes were. Tap, tap. I flinched into the wheel. He smiled without changing his eyes. Then he dropped away. The mirror rocked. I put it in low, released the brakes, and crept toward the fuel island where a box truck idled and a guy in a hoodie smoked under the awning. If my 5th wheel had been pulled, I didn't want to drop the trailer. Every pebble under the tires felt like a choice. I expected him to lunge back into view. He didn't. At the pumps, I set the brakes and kept my hands on the wheel. The smoker glanced over and looked away. A county cruiser rolled in. The deputy walked the lot with a flashlight, checked under the trailer and the lines, and said everything looked intact. He pointed out greasy fingerprints on the passenger handle and scuffs on the 5th wheel. He asked for a description. I said, tall, thin, wet. He told me to keep it locked, stay in the light, and call if I saw him again. I didn't sleep. I sat with the engine off and the key turned so the headlights were ready. I watched the mirrors until the sky went grey and the highway picked up more cars. In daylight, I found 2 things I hadn't seen. One was a smiley face traced into the grime on my passenger door, right where he'd tapped the glass. The other was a strip of duct tape wrapped around my service airline near the glad hand. Under the tape was a shallow nick, not enough to fail sitting still, enough to fail later. I replaced the line with the spare I carry and tried not to picture the 2 ways the night could have gone him asleep. Under someone's trailer with a blade in his pocket, or me 2 hours down the road when the line let go in traffic. Before I pulled out, I walked a slow circle. The gravel was raked up under the catwalk like someone had stood there a long time. Prints turned and ended under the trailer. None came out the other side. I texted my wife that I was fine and rolling. I didn't tell her about the tape. I eased onto I-80. The wipers squeaked. I still stop at that lot because there aren't many choices on that stretch. I still park nose out with the engine ready. I listen for the hollow knock under the sleeper. I tell myself it was one man on one bad night, and that the duct tape was a joke or a warning and not the start of something worse. Then I remember the way he looked at me through the glass, like he'd been in the cab before and couldn't he understand why I locked him out. I keep the doors locked. I tell myself I won't see him again. I also tell myself I will. Both thoughts make my heart pound. Both feel true. This happened on a run through New Mexico in 2021. I was hauling dry freight westbound on I-40, somewhere between Tucumcari and Albuquerque. It was one of those nights when the desert feels endless flat land on all sides. No lights except my own, and a black sky that seemed to press down on the cab. It was close to 1 a.m. when I noticed headlights in my mirror. A pair of them, far back at first, slowly closing the gap. Nothing unusual. Cars pass, trucks, all the time. But what struck me was how long they stayed behind me, never making a move to pass, just hovering 200 feet back. 10 minutes turned into 20. Every time I checked, the headlights were still there, pacing me. I tapped the brakes lightly, figuring maybe they'd take the hint and go around. Instead, they drifted closer. Finally, the car pulled into the left lane and eased up beside me. It was an older model sedan, maybe a late 90s Buick. The paint was dull, and only one headlight worked. I glanced down into the driver's seat. The person behind the wheel was tall, with greasy black hair hanging round his face. He turned his head toward me as he passed, and for a few seconds we locked eyes. His expression was completely blank. No anger, no curiosity, just empty. He pulled ahead and slid back into my lane, but instead of speeding off, he slowed down. Way down, I had to brake hard to keep from rear-ending him. Then he tapped his brakes twice, like he wanted me to follow. My pulse spiked. Every instinct screamed not to. I eased into the left lane to pass him, but as soon as I drew even, he swerved toward me, forcing me halfway onto the shoulder. Gravel pinged under my tires. I laid on the air horn, but he didn't react. I dropped back, letting him take the lane again. For a while we rode like that, me tailing him at a safe distance, my heart hammering. Then, without warning, he pulled onto the shoulder and stopped dead. His brake lights glowed red in the darkness. I passed him without looking, desperate to put distance between us. For a few miles, I thought maybe it was over. Then I saw his lone headlight flare in my mirror again. He was back. He tailed me like that for nearly 40 miles. Sometimes drifting so close I could barely see his bumper, other times hanging far back. I considered calling 911, but out there in the middle of nowhere, I didn't know if anyone would reach me in time. Finally, I spotted a well-lit truck stop at the next exit. I figured if I could just get into a crowd, he'd back off. I pulled in, swung wide around the pumps, and parked nose out near a row of The sedan rolled in right after me. I locked my doors and sat rigid, watching in the mirrors as he circled the lot once. His lone headlight swept across the cabs, across the pumps, and finally across me. Then he stopped directly behind my trailer. For a long minute, he just sat there. I could see the outline of his head in the glow of his dash, unmoving. Then his door opened. The man stepped out, tall and thin, his coat hanging loose around his frame. He didn't head for the store. He didn't fuel up. He walked straight toward my cab, his shoes crunching on the gravel. I grabbed the mic for my CB and called out, "Driver in the Buick, back off. I've called the cops." He didn't even look up at me. He stopped at my passenger side door and tried the handle. When it didn't open, he leaned close to the window. His hair hung in greasy strings, hiding his face, but I could hear his breathing. Slow, heavy. My skin crawled. I slammed the air horn again, long and loud. A few drivers stepped out of the store, turning toward the sound. The man finally looked over his shoulder at them. Then, just as calmly as he'd walked up, he turned, got back into his sedan, and drove out of the lot. I waited 30 minutes before leaving, scanning every car on the highway for that single headlight. I never saw him again. But the next morning, when I walked around my rig at the receiver in Albuquerque, I found something scratched into the grime on my trailer door. For words, jagged and uneven. You can't hide. I've changed routes since then. I avoid night runs whenever I can, but sometimes, when a lone headlight fills my mirror for too long, I still grip the wheel until my knuckles turn white, waiting for him to come back. This one happened in 2018, on a route through northern Arkansas. I was hauling furniture out of Little Rock and heading north along Highway 65. It was late, past midnight, and the road twisted through thick patches of forest. Hardly any traffic, no truck stops for miles, just me, the hum of the engine, and the dark woods pressing in on both sides. I'd been driving about an hour when I noticed a dim light through the trees. It looked like it came from an old gas station set back off the highway. Most places like that are abandoned, but I saw a flickering neon open sign in the window. My fuel was fine, but I figured I'd stop for a coffee and stretch my legs. The lot was cracked asphalt, with weeds sprouting through. A single overhead lamp buzzed, casting sickly yellow light across two rusted pumps. No other vehicles in sight. I pulled in slow headlights sweeping the building. Inside, the store looked half empty. Rows of dusty shelves, coolers humming weakly in the back. Behind the counter stood a man. He was tall, rail-thin, with pale skin and greasy blonde hair that hung past his jaw. He wore a faded red flannel that looked 2 sizes too small. He watched me the entire time I walked in, never blinking, never moving his head, just tracking me with his eyes. "Coffee machines still work?" I asked. He nodded once, didn't say a word. I poured myself a cup from a stained glass pot that looked like it had been sitting there for hours. My gut told me not to drink it, but I wanted something warm in my hands. As I turned back toward the counter, I noticed something strange. There were no prices anywhere. No stickers, no tags. The shelves were nearly bare except for a few random items. A single can of soup, a pack of batteries, an old road atlas. I set the coffee on the counter. The man leaned forward slowly, resting his long fingers on the wood. His nails were yellowed, too long. "That your truck outside?" he finally asked. His voice was flat, almost monotone. "Yeah," I said carefully. He smiled then, just barely, lips pulling tight without showing teeth. He slid the coffee back toward me without ringing it up. No charge. Every hair on my neck stood up. Something about the way he said it made me feel like I shouldn't argue. I thanked him, turned, and walked out fast. When I stepped into the night, I froze. The driver's side door of my rig was open. I know for a fact I had locked it. My chest tightened as I scanned the lot. Nobody. Just the buzzing lamp and the dead pumps. I climbed up, shining my flashlight inside. The cab was empty, sleeper too. Nothing missing. I shut the door, locked it again, and fired the engine. I glanced once more at the store. The man was still at the counter, standing in the same position, watching me through the window. I didn't even sip the coffee. I pulled back onto the highway and pushed the rig hard, determined to put as much distance as I could between me and that place. About 10 miles later, I finally started to calm down. The trees thinned, and the road stretched straight. That's when I caught movement in my sleeper's little window behind me. A shadow. I nearly swerved off the road. My heart slammed into my throat. I flicked the cab light on, twisted around, and yanked the curtain wide. Nothing. Just blankets dot empty space. But the air felt wrong, heavy, stale, like someone had been breathing back there for too long. I drove straight through to a rest area outside Harrison, parked under the brightest lamp I could find, surrounded by 3 other rigs. I forced myself to get out, check every inch of the trailer, every latch, every compartment. Nothing. But when I got back into the cab, there was something sitting in the cup holder. Something I hadn't put there. A single, old brass key. I never figured out what it unlocked. I threw it into a dumpster the next morning, but for weeks after, I kept catching myself glancing at the sleeper window in the mirrors, half expecting to see a face staring back. And I never, ever stop at lonely gas stations anymore.